the Rangers Journal now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rangers Journal. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic very close to my heart, and I'm sure it'll be close to yours as well. It's the Man Mountain, Dujon Sterling, that we're going to be talking through today. To discuss this, I've got Bob on board. How are you, Bob?
Yeah, not too bad today. Not too bad. Looking forward to talking about the man, the myth, the legend, the man of many talents, the Mr. Sterlings. So yeah, looking forward to today.
Yeah, he's certainly getting close to legendary status already, isn't he? Gary, thanks very much for joining us. How are you today, mate?
Yeah, very well. Thank you for inviting me on. I've been part of the Journal's group chat now for a few weeks, but never quite managed to make it onto the main show as of yet. So yeah, happy to join the ranks and give my considerable level of Rangers takes on the situation. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Good. And Gary, it's a pleasure to have you as a part of the team. Do you want to talk a bit about some of the stuff that you do outside of Rangers Journal?
Yeah, so people may well know me from Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. I've been part of that team for a good while now, since 2018. And since 2022, I've been fronting the podcasts for the Fourth Official, as you can probably see from the background there. And we just recently launched our YouTube channel as well, so doing some of the stuff that you boys are doing on there. So you can see my face finally, and not just have to deal with my dulcet tones. But yeah, people should be relatively familiar with me from Rangers podcasts for a number of years now. So no, it's nice to share the wealth and be on other platforms.
Good. So go check those out. We'll put some links to those in the description as well, so you can check out those podcasts too. Thanks for joining us again, Gary.
Not a problem.
Cool. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking through Dujon Sterlings. So this guy joined Rangers. For those that don't know, I don't know where you've been if you don't know this, but he joined at the start of 23, midway through 23. We got him from Chelsea. He'd had various loans before that from the Chelsea youth setup coming through. He went out to Coventry, Wigan, Blackpool, and then most recently Stoke. Normally being deployed as a right back from his Chelsea days, but prior to that, he had been known to play further up front. I think I saw something where he was playing with Tammy Abraham in a youth game for Chelsea. So he's definitely versatile, and I think we'll come on to that, lads. So, Bob, I've got here in front of us quite a ludicrous heat map of Dujon Sterling's positions during the season, and I guess kind of where he's had an impact. Look, what does that tell you about Sterling?
I think it tells us that, as we've all kind of come to see and know from the past season, that you can be deployed almost anywhere and be really quite proficient in that role. I think, predominantly you can see it's on the right hand side of the park, whether it's right back, right midfield, or right wing. He's not really let us down in any of the games that he's played. I'm even thinking back probably to the early cup game against Morton to kind of start of last season. Left back not being his favoured position, but he did relatively well. But again, that was probably one of his first games for us. So I think he's come a long way since then. But yeah, he's been, you can see he can be really deployed almost anywhere. I think just sad to see that he's not been played kind of up front or in goal yet. So that may happen. But I think if he were, he would do a job for us.
Yeah, he's definitely versatile. Gary, do you think he was brought in with a position in mind, as in a backup for Tav, or where's your head at?
Right, it's difficult because if you look right at the start of the season, obviously brought in by Michael Beale, and we obviously all know what happened with Michael Beale, but Michael Beale wasn't necessarily playing him in those first couple of months of the season very much because obviously the club captain, James Tavernier, is there at right back, but you didn't quite see him deployed in other areas unless there were injuries in the team. So you obviously saw the first Old Firm game of the season where he was playing left back. That was because we didn't have any other options at that time. Borna was Borna and Hayden from an Old Firm game, and Ridvan Yilmaz was injured, as we've seen on several occasions throughout the season. So we had to play him at left back, and actually I don't think he performed too badly on the wrong side, albeit that I think that whole game we kind of struggled to get out, but I don't necessarily think that Dujon Sterling was the problem. I think he did his job on that day fairly well and kind of coped with what was happening down the Celtic right on that day. But yeah, I think certainly he was brought in, I think, with a view to being maybe the heir apparent to Tav down the line,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
with the ability to fit in other areas as and when required. And I think it's only really since Clement has came in that we've started to kind of see, well, actually, the skill set that Sterling's got allows us to actually play him in a multitude of positions. And because of the injury crisis we saw throughout the season with multiple players being injured and not being available in their said positions, then Dujon, because he was Mr. Adaptable and been able to kind of be that utility player, whether it was playing him in the heart of midfield like we saw at Hampden for the Cup final, or playing as one of the front two as the kind of wide players because all our wingers were injured.
Mm.
He's fit a hole rather than being actually his position. And I think it's probably fair to say now that a year into his Rangers career, I don't think anyone can be hard pushed to say he's a right back or he's a left back or he's a centre mid or he's a wide midfield player. He's just a very, very adaptable squad player that will do a job wherever he's required. And I think the hope for me going into next season is that he finds himself at maybe a bit more of a consistent place in the starting 11, and we start to, rather than being a kind of horses for courses, kind of having him where there's a space, it's actually
Mhm.
going, well,
Mhm.
you're my best right midfielder or you're my best right back or whatever it is we decide, this is you're going to be your position. And there can be some deviation from that, of course, but I think for his benefit, I don't really want him to see him turning into the brand new Christian Daly, where he's every week he's in a slightly different position on the park, albeit doing a great job for the team, but for his own benefit and his own development, still a young player. I think the best benefit we've got as a club with the whole player trading model is to cultivate him now in a particular position and go, right, you're going to be my starting right back for next season, or you're going to be playing one ahead of the right back, or you're going to be anchoring in midfield where John Lundstrom used to be. And
Yeah.
I think we go with that and go, right, that's where you're going to be. And obviously, if injuries dictate he needs to move around a bit, then he can do that. But he has a starting point and we keep him there.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good point. It's very difficult when you have a player who is adequate's not the right word, but able to play so many positions, to actually narrow that down and allow him to cultivate his craft in that specific area without giving him too much of a a mixed bag of positions, if you will,
Yeah.
like he's
You
had
don't
this
want him
year.
to be jack of all trades but master of none. And I
Yeah.
think that's the one big concern I've got with Dujon Sterling is towards the end of last season, if even in games he was playing maybe 3 or 4 positions in the one match, let alone
Yeah.
multiple games. So that's great for him that he can do a job for the team. But in terms of his own development, he's still a young, raw player that needs development. And I think the best way he can do that is by narrowing down and going, right, you're going to be my starting right back. The biggest problem we've got is that our starting right back's a club captain, and it has been for 9 years and has been incredibly consistent. And I don't want to turn this show into a what do we do with Tav type program, but it's very much something that we need to decide what we're doing as a club in terms of that position. Because if that's the case, then do you go out and you recruit again to replace that, or do you go, right, we've got Sterling there as a man in situ, that's going to be your jersey for next season, and we run with that.
Yeah, completely agree. And we'll come on to what we think Dujon's best position is and how we think he can kind of take those next steps, because I do think there's quite a high ceiling with this lad. For those that are watching at home, please do put in the chat or in the function below what you think his best position is, how you think he should be deployed next year, and we'll have a read of that and talk it through on the next pod. Bob, it was mentioned before that he kind of came in out of necessity. I think it's fair to say, he was kind of brought in at a time when it was a lot of injuries, quite an unstable time from a management point of view. A lot of players trying to play their way into Clement's plans. And one of the first games that I think Sterling really shone and showed his true ability was against Real Betis away. Clearly a very tough fixture, but one that he seemed to really excel in. I'll just read you through a few of these, Bob. So 100% long ball accuracy, 83% pass accuracy, 50% dribble success, 5 tackles, 4 recoveries, like really strong stats against a good Betis team. And we were very much backs to the wall, and I think the underdogs in this team. What did you start to see from Dujon Sterling at this point that perhaps you hadn't known was there in his sort of arsenal before these sorts of games?
I think when you take that game as a starting point, I think you can see, as you can see obviously from the stats, he's got a good passing range. He is physical. He can play forward. He's as much as he's a defender. He has an eye for a pass. He can put the ball forward into the attacking areas where we obviously need it to be, especially away from home. As you said, backs to the wall. It's always going to be a tough game. I think at the time we hadn't done very well on Spanish soil to that point. So to be the kind of the linchpin of that team at that point in that game, kind of probably gave us the grounding to go on and play some good football, especially so early in Clement's reign as manager. And I think, just touching on what yourself and Gary said, I think, when he comes in, you initially think, why is he, why is this right back getting put in midfield? And then from that point on, I think from that, for the rest of the season, we've all kind of clamoured for him to be in that midfield role, either beside Diamandi when he came in or beside Lundstrom. So yeah, I think the centre of the park probably suits him, as you said. We'll probably come on to that, but to me, in that type of game when it's really a must win, he was very dependable, and I think that then set the stage for him for the rest of the season to say this is a guy that we can kind of hang our hat on and depend upon. If he stays fit, and again, obviously we'll probably touch on that as well. But I thought he did very well in that game, and again, just gave him the launch pad for the rest of the season to be considered probably one of the players of the year.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think it was around this time, wasn't it, Gary, when we started to see not just a right back who, I don't know if like you, as soon as I hear a sniff of a Rangers rumour, I'm on YouTube and I'm watching him at Stoke and he's playing right back and he looks all right. He looks to do pretty well. And we think he's coming in as maybe an understudy. But at this point of the season, I think we started to see a different player, a player that is able to run with the ball, aggressive in the tackle, someone that has a burst of pace. What was it about him, Gary, that you started to see at this point that kind of changed your opinion or thoughts about actually what role this guy could play?
I think what helped him is all the attributes that he had that we didn't have elsewhere in the team. So we speak about that athleticness that he's got, and particularly when he's playing in the middle of the park. At that time, obviously Diamandi hadn't came in as of yet, but you're then comparing him to a Ryan Jack or a John Lundstrom, who, for all their qualities they've not got maybe the same engine that Dujon Sterling has at this stage in his career, where he can get up and down the park. You on your graphic there, you were talking about ball receptions and turnovers, and that's all the recoveries and the tackles, and that's all the things that you don't necessarily get from a John Lundstrom, who very much has got the engine to go back to back, but at this stage in his career, he wasn't quite doing it. He would go on to have a bit of a good purple patch for 2-3 months, and then we all know how the season ended for John Lundstrom. But I think Dujon Sterling gave you something different in that area of the park at a time where we needed something different. Nico Rashkin wasn't fit or available or quoted at that time, and he was a player who was very impressive at the tail end of the previous season under Michael Beale, and for whatever reason it just didn't quite happen for Nico last season. But Dujon gave you the legs in midfield that then would give you a platform to then go and build somewhere else. And we spoke a lot this year certainly when I've been around the likes of Cantwell and Tom Lawrence and Kieran Dowell, for all their kind of skill set that they've got, the ability to recover the ball and then build and launch an attack the other way is not something that they've got. So he gave you something that was a little bit different that we didn't have in midfield, and it gave you a bit more stability there, particularly when he was playing alongside Lundstrom, because Lundstrom has got this habit of dropping back into almost his back four. And that then leaves us very isolated in the middle of the park and sometimes overloaded in there. And having Sterling and then laterally Diamande there, their legs and energy in there is something that we didn't really see until previous years with the likes of Glenn Kamara in there that could give you those legs in midfield and be able to occupy two players at once. So that, I think, was a real benefit of him and showed him, Clement particularly, that this is someone that we can rely on in this position. It's not natural there, but I think he found a way of making it work for him and then suiting the team to kind of play that way. And I think when we see him in kind of later months playing the kind of wide forward type position, the one thing that I think he doesn't have in his game is the goal threat that I think you need, particularly from a wide forward. So whilst you still benefit from his ability to get up and down the park and particularly support the fullback, if he's playing that kind of wide forward way, you lose the kind of natural instinct of being on the end of the cross when it's at the other end of the park, or kind of being an extra attacker in the box. He's got that kind of natural defensive nature, and I think that's something that we do need to work on if that's an area of the park that we want to play him in going forward, because it isn't something that's natural to him. Now, could he develop into a very decent wide forward? Potentially, but that will require a real good pre-season and a plan for what to do with him. And I think based on his attributes that he's got at the moment, I think particularly the fact that we've lost Lundstrom, I think there's a space in the team where he's shown he can be mega effective, and it means we don't necessarily need to go out to market to replace John Lundstrom because we've got someone there. Now, we'll probably go on to go, is that the best place for him, or could we use him elsewhere? But for me, that's what I'd be looking to try and do. And that then maybe allows you a bit of time to then integrate a new player into the squad. So whether it is a Damien Gathia or someone of that ilk that's coming from another continent, a different way of life, then that would seem takes a bit of time for them to adjust to the very unique nature of Scottish football, that some players will take to very quickly and some need a bit of time to develop. And I think that could be something we look to do, particularly with very important European qualifiers. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see Dujon Sterling begin those games in the heart of midfield.
Bob, I think when we first started to see Dujon Sterling in a bit of a more attacking or further up the pitch position, they actually Clement deployed him on the left. And I think if you remember, he didn't maybe have the best game. I think he was just a bit out of it rather than did anything wrong. But he seems now to be favoured in that kind of right midfield, right wing position, specifically probably in games where we're playing firmer opposition and players who may dominate that midfield, which allows him to come in and create that kind of overload in there. So notably the games against Celtic recently, he's performed that way. We had Joe Aribo in the team a few years ago, who used to be predominantly a number 10 creative player, pulling the strings in midfield, but was also played on that right-hand side in those tougher games where we might have the need to overload the midfield. Do you think you could see Sterling forming into that position? I know Gary said that he doesn't necessarily have the attacking threat that maybe someone else could have, but having seen how Sterling has been an attacker in his younger days, do you think there's maybe that sort of instinct within him that we could start to get out of him a little more?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think, just what Gary was touching on and what you've said, I think on that right-hand side of midfield, whether it's, in the kind of right wing position or on the right-hand side of a three, he offers the protection for the midfield, having that defensive nature about him. But also, I think even when I'm thinking back to the away game against Benfica, when he came on as a right winger, or he started. I can't remember if he started or if he came on, but obviously he got the goal. He was a threat on that right hand side, and again, it just went to show us that he wasn't just an able deputy for Tavernier at right back. He was able to kind of show us a bit more range, and I do think that Clement has been able to see in him a player that he can trust and can build part of the team around anyway. But I'd be quite interested to see if he retains, as kind of Gary said, whether he takes over the position that Lundstrom had in the team as the kind of central defensive midfielder, or does he keep to the right hand side? But again, I think, as you said, in those bigger games against Celtic, maybe in Europe as well, he's shown that he can really flourish in a way against European opposition from that right hand side. And for me, going forward, he's definitely. I don't think we would have any fear if he was to be played in that position. I do agree with Gary and what you've said. I do think we need to kind of find a position for him to make his own. And obviously there's a number of reasons why he couldn't do that over the past season. I'm hoping for a bit more consistency, continuity, less injuries, less,
disruption.
Less disruption in the team this coming season. But yeah, I think he's more than capable. I think he could very well be, made into an attacking player if Clement sees him in that mould. But he also had, again, as you said, because he's come from Chelsea, where he's probably been coached very well, he still having that defensive side to his game maybe offers us something extra, especially if he is coached by Clement into an attacking position, that he'll still have some form of, say, muscle memory, that if defensively, if we need him, he can kind of tuck in and protect the team from a defensive side, as well as hopefully maybe being more creative and more attacking next season in the games to come.
Yeah, it's definitely a blessing and a curse being good in a lot of positions, isn't it? And honing in on it. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been smiling this whole podcast so far because I just love Dujon Sterling. I absolutely love him. I think I said on one of the early podcasts when he first played, we should change his name to Dujon Sterling because he's mustard to play against. And I think he is an absolute nightmare for defenders to play against. One of the things, Gary, that I absolutely love about him, and I'm not trying to poach a Castor term here, but he has the mindset of better never stops, doesn't he? He has a mindset of, this isn't good enough. This isn't good enough. I will hold myself accountable. I will take on the mantle of calling out the teammates when I need to. And that is something we've been crying out for God knows how long. Someone to take that control and say, this isn't good enough. We need to be better. I love that. What are your thoughts?
We've spoken about the leadership group and how they've, for a lot of time, come out after a disappointing result and hit you with the usual, we were disappointed, but we'll learn from it. And we've heard it too many times for us to now believe it, that something's going to change. You saw that with Sterling after the Old Firm game, where he came out and had a bit of a pop. And I know Clement kind of was trying to do something a little bit different at that time in terms of trying to protect the players a little bit from being thrown under a bus. And I think privately he would have been delighted that Sterling's got that in him, that he called out his mates, because they needed to be called out at that time, because it was a really poor result at a time we couldn't afford a poor result. So going into the new season, where it's a fresh start, blank canvas, we've managed to free up a lot of resource, a lot of wages, a lot of people moving on that really had to move on, if we're honest, in terms of tenure at the club. Still a bit more of work to be done on that front, but as a symbol of the new Rangers going into next season, you want, there's a song that goes, we all want a team of Davy Weirs, we all want a team of Dujon Sterlings, and the ideal, because they can play in 14 different positions. So you'd love it, a Dujon Sterling at right back and a Dujon Sterling in midfield and a Dujon Sterling on the right, because that gives you that capability and that skill set 3 times. So we should be looking in the market, and that's why I'm quite pleased about the links to someone like Royal Walters at Arsenal, because he's someone that looks very similar in terms of profile to a Dujon Sterling. He's got that academy education from a big club, maybe not quite going to make it at Arsenal, but you know what? Who does at that level? But he's going to have that technical ability. He's been trained really, really well from a young age, and has got that will to win of knowing that, you know, a draw isn't good enough away to St Mirren, where someone coming from a Motherwell or an Aberdeen or somewhere like that, that's an acceptable result. It's not acceptable for Rangers to drop points in Dingwall. So you want people to come in that have got that will to win. They've got that can-do attitude that will drive on and try and move the club forward. If we are looking in the market for a new captain for next season, he could be an option. And I think we've got to look at if that happens or not. But he's someone that I think has got that capability to be able to take that position and drive with it. So interesting few weeks ahead, but I think he's one that I would be certainly looking to try and build the team around for next year. And if he has another season like he's had last year, then we're maybe having this conversation in 12 months' time going, can we keep him? Because at that point, then the vultures will come in. But at that point, you're looking at big money to get him.
Definitely. I think we saw it, didn't we, with Calvin Bassey, again, academy educated and brought up through the system, again, came in with a sort of infectious, energetic, kind of inspiring on the pitch for the players around him, someone that really understands football and is a strong athletic player. If we're looking at this lad, Royal Walters, as well, I'm hoping he fits that some of the things. So maybe in the future, this is a good, I guess, route for us to be looking at these sort of academy players that maybe aren't quite
financially
at the level
as well. It's massively important because you can get them in for a relatively low cost in terms of transfer fee. And let's be honest, we can't go down and buy someone from the English Premiership. In fact, we probably can't even buy people from the top end of English Championship just now that are on 2-3 year contracts. So that's got to be the model of trying. And do you know what? Not all will work, but you might get the odd Calvin Bassey that you can then develop. You look at Frimpong that Celtic managed to get from Man City, and he stayed a year. They flipped him for 11 million. So that's the type of deal that we have to do for player trading model to work and to work effectively, because they are the players that have got the potential of a high ceiling. And Dujon Sterling absolutely has got a high ceiling, but we need to cultivate him really, really well. We caught fire with Calvin Bassey and the fact that he had an excellent 6 months playing at a level where probably none of us really expected to be at, if we're being perfectly honest, that season. But there was loads of eyes on him from a European perspective, and then that allowed Ajax to come in with mega money, and at that point you don't turn it down. And he's gone on to have a very decent career and will do at the Premiership level for the next maybe 10-15 years of his career. Very underrated at Fulham last year, but played pretty much every game down there. So shows that that's the skill set we've got to be looking to try and identify. And someone like a Walters, someone like a Sterling, they can absolutely turn into our next 8-figure player.
Yeah, I'd agree. Bob, just bringing this up here, which is kind of I guess a summary of Sterling's first real season here, and sort of where he's had he's played 24 times. It's still not the amount of games that probably he could be playing if we were able to cultivate that precise precision for him. I think it's all right being a 7 out of 10 every game, playing all over the pitch, but how can he be a 9-10 out of 10 in one position and really hone that in? I do think he's got the ability to do it. I think one of the things, Bob, that stands out to me is his actual ability to pass a ball, which surprised me massively. He rarely gives the ball away. Let's move on to, I guess, what we think where he should be playing next season, Bob. We've spoken about his sort of failed-ish venture on the left wing, obviously dropped in at left back. I think probably we'll all agree sort of should be on that right-hand side, if not in midfield.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, especially obviously with the rumours that are currently going about, regarding the captain and the vice captain, I think, defensively he's more than capable of slotting in as a right back. He's got the physicality, he's got the pace, and as you see, he's got the passing credentials to really make that his own if it comes to pass that we need a right back at the end of the summer. But again, as we've touched on earlier on, if he comes into right midfield or right wing, again, same credentials apply. If his passing is extremely good, he's very, very talented on the ball and off the ball. But I think if Clement can mould him, if we take that kind of central midfield position that Lundstrom did have, and say, right, in my opinion, if that's where he's going to play, he's got the capability of being far more creative and attacking and probably build on the numbers that he had this season from that position. I would like to think he's got probably the model that we're looking for in that kind of young. He's got he's got energy. He's as athletic as we've already touched on. He could really be a box to box midfielder if he adds goals and more assists to his game. As Gary said, in 12 months' time, we could be struggling to hold on to him, and he could very well be the next kind of big money exit from the club. As we've kind of touched on with Calvin Bassey. But I think if he, especially with the as I said, the kind of transfer model that we seem to be looking at, with again having to take the example of Diamandi coming in, he's technically very good on the ball. Same as Diamandi, Sterling's very technically good on the ball, but again, having, maybe being British is also an extra quality. Being, the kind of premium, kind of as Gary touched on, the premium price that you need to pay for a British or an English, footballer these days is obviously probably over the odds. So again, just as you touched on, the fact that Bassey went from us to Ajax for 23 million, and they then recouped that by selling him to Fulham last summer. If Sterling goes on that same trajectory, it could be very much similar numbers, if not higher, if he, as I said, hones a skill, being that kind of central midfield linchpin that we hope he maybe grows into. And it also, as Gary and you touched on, it also shows those players that are maybe on the fringes of a Premiership team, like Ruel Walters at Arsenal, or another from any of the other kind of Premiership teams, that coming up to Scotland and playing for Rangers or a Celtic, as we touched on with Frimpong, is definitely not the worst route to take to become a kind of top professional at the top level. So he's very much a prime example of, again, as I said, if we manage to get him in a position, in my opinion, it would be central midfield, kind of in that kind of DM role on the right hand side. There's really no ceiling he can't break through at this moment in time.
Yeah, there'll certainly be a number of teams, I think, keeping an eye on him. He's at an age 24 where he's still played a lot of professional games. If you look at his loan spells out, but now he's playing at a level above those. He'll be playing in Europe, and that exposure can hopefully just propel him on. I think what's really key, Gary, is that we actually make sure that there are these case studies of where players have taken the step up and then have the next step, the sort of bigger jump afterwards. So we can use that as a test bed for other prospects to say, those players that are on the fringes of the first team, say, look, give us a year, give us 18 months. We'll get you playing in Europe. We'll get you exposure. And we have the case studies of Bassey, potentially Sterling, and, a couple of others there is proof in the pudding.
Absolutely. And at the same time, we've got to look at developing that from our own perspective as well. So you look at a young lad, Alex Smith, 15-year-old, who's going to come on, but you've got to then show him, right, well, what's the trajectory for you? How are you going to get involved in the first team? Certainly might not be this year, but what's the plan for you? How are we going to develop you into our next player? Because it's something that we've not been good enough at. But if we do it enough, then that's absolutely going to be your sales pitch, and Coppin can go down to these academies and say, right, exactly that. Come and do a year with us. Come and do 2 years with us. We'll turn you into a £10 million player, rather than sitting in Chelsea's reserves or on loan to Vitesse Arnhem or whoever it is that they're doing with all of their young lads. That's got to be the avenue you come up here. I think for me, for Sterling, for next year, you said he's made 24 appearances or last season. You've got to be looking at doubling that for him for next year. He's going to play every game that he's fit, you would imagine. He's going to be a big part of the rebuild. So it's about him then taking his game to the next level. And I actually think he'll benefit from the fact that he now knows the league. He now knows St Mirren away. He knows what going to Pittodrie's like. He'll know what challenges that we have going to Dingwall on a Sunday at 12 o'clock. 2 days after we've just got back from playing in Outer Mongolia in a European game. So that advantage of him knowing the league and knowing the pressures of playing week in, week out for Rangers, I think will put him in a good stead, because we know we're going to have a lot of new players next season. So that establishment of him and alongside other players that have come in to Diamandi do in 6 months, we're looking for them all to kick on next year.
Yeah. And Gary, for me, I think his best position is centre midfield. I know a few lads in the Rangers Journal chat have kind of kicked off about that and said something different. So, like, as I say, if you're listening at home, watching at home, and you've got an opinion, stick it in the chat, please.
I don't think we've seen enough from him in one place to know what his best place is yet. And I think that's the one thing we all need to go out is he's done a job anywhere he's played. But in your slide you put up earlier, he played, 6 games at right back, 6 in centre mid, 6 at right wing. So he's not had a prolonged period of time in any one place to be able to say that's what his best place is. Now, we're all football fans and we've got eyes and we can see how effective he was. And I think we probably all look back on that period around about Christmas last year where we won the League Cup and he was doing really, really well in the heart of the midfield. And we were harking back to that at the tail end of the season going, we'll put him back there because that's when we kind of needed to get back to those sort of levels of playing. And I think if we can get a recruitment right and get proper wingers in, then there's actually no need to play Dujon Sterling as a winger because he's not a winger. So it was very much a kind of horses for courses pick there because everybody else was in the treatment room. But we've got Cortez back. If he's fit, then he plays as a winger. You develop Ross McCausland, he plays as a winger. You bring in someone else, they play as a winger. And then you put Sterling where he's meant to be, whether that's in the Lundstrom role in the heart of the midfield or as a replacement for Tav. I think that's got to be either place that he goes next year, and you give him the opportunity to be our starting midfielder or our starting right back, knowing that he's got the ability to fit in somewhere else if we have another disaster or someone breaks down at left back, then right, he can maybe fill a hole for 45 minutes or so. But for me, that's what we do for next season. And I think we already mentioned the European games. We're not going to have time to bed in Damian Garcia or someone like that for big games. So it would not surprise me in the slightest to see him start the season in the heart of the midfield. Whether he ends it or not there, I think we'll see what happens on that front. But it's a lot easier to accommodate a right back than someone being right in the heart of your team in that spine. And I think going into those big games, you want the spine at least to be solid.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think for me, just going back to what we're saying, I think his best position could be sat next to Diamandi. So Lundstrom likes receiving the ball off the back, the back four. I think you mentioned it earlier. I think a lot of it was to do with the transition of play. I think Clement's tried to play 2 different formations, one in possession and one out of possession. So one where we're, moving forward, allowing the wingers to step on a bit. Lundstrom drops in a bit and will receive the ball off the centre backs. But then also attacking wise, he wants Lundstrom to be a bit further on. I think he probably needs to tweak that slightly with Sterling because Sterling's probably not that player to pick it off the defenders and pass the ball forward. Gary, I'm conscious you've got to shoot off in a second, so I don't know if you just want to say thanks for listening. It's been a pleasure to have you on, Gary.
Absolutely. Certainly be plenty of opportunity, I think, across the summer going into next season for me to continue to share my wealth of knowledge on here. So no, thank you for having me, and I'll leave you lads to take it home.
Thanks, Gary. Bob, Gary mentioned something earlier, and it's not something that's crossed my mind, but could Dujon Sterling, if we decide to back the guy and say, look, he's not for sale, he's ours, we're going to build a team around him. It was really encouraging to see him on the kit launches and stuff like that. He's become a focal player. Could this guy be a future Rangers captain?
I definitely think so. I think you've got to see the trust that the manager's put into him, or shown in him since the manager came in. Again, I probably wanted to touch on it earlier on, but the fact that when Clement came in, he was really surprised at the fact that Sterling hadn't played a lot of games for us at that point. From kind of the summer to October, and more or less any time he was fit, he was in the squad, if not starting. So I do think that if he can be more consistent, again, we all know what the injury situation was like last season. I think if we can resolve that in the summer and make sure that the likes of Sterling, Diamandi, and the rest are all at a top level of fitness get into this new season, the consistency should come from that. And I do think if the time comes, he's definitely one of the candidates. I do think this new model that we're looking, or say new model, this model that we're looking to implement with the type of player that we're looking at, he's certainly one of those that would be very hard pressed to sell for a low figure if he continues on the way that he is. I do think that he should form part of a new leadership group. Considering, again, I don't want to go back to the old stuff, but again, if the manager's saying it's an end of a cycle, so for me, that leadership group of Tav, Goldson, Lundstrom, you say Borna, the fact that these guys, Borna's away, Lundstrom's away, there's rumours about, Tav and Goldson potentially exiting the club this summer at some point. If that does come to pass, then you have to look at these kind of younger lads that have, as Gary touched on, and you've said, they've come in, they know the league now, they've played for us for a year or two, and can really step up, hopefully, to that new leadership group. And I do think it's not before time. You kind of touched on it earlier on in the pod, Ross, that I think we need to look forward. Dujon Sterling is that archetypal player that we should be looking at. Young, British, physical, athletic, technically very good, isn't afraid to put his body on the line. He kind of tells it how it is. The fact that in at least one of the post-match interviews, he was obviously very frank with his wording. And again, that's great to see, because it shows that he cares. I'm like, well, the guy's only been with us for less than a year at that point, and he's taken the club to heart and is trying to show the values that us as fans want the players to hold themselves to on a weekly basis, whether it's at home or away or in Europe. And I think he's certainly one that if he wasn't seen as a captain, he's definitely in that leadership group. I definitely wouldn't have any qualms with him being handed the armband at any point, whether Tav's still here or not.
Yeah, I think you've something you said there is so true, and I think it's probably one of the reasons why a lot of Rangers fans, I would dare say the majority of Rangers fans, have such an affinity with the guy already, and it's standards. That's what it is. He has standards in his play, the way he holds himself, and he never shirks responsibility. He's very accountable. I think one other thing as well, for a 24-year-old, he doesn't play like a kid. He's quite mature. He seems like he's a seasoned player who we've brought in to steady the ship rather than someone to come in and try and impress the manager. I think another thing, and I'd be interested to get your take on this, Bob. We're going to wrap up shortly.
Sure.
But I think what he does is, I mentioned it on a previous pod about Cantwell being a great player, but he tries to do his own thing a bit. I think Sterling is a very humble player, and he is willing to do the job, whatever that is, that feeds into the greater plan of the manager. Surely, Bob, we should be looking at trying to get more players like that, who have that humble nature about them, to try and achieve what Clement's, his overarching style of play is, his ambition for the team, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I 100% agree, Ross. I think, there's to take the old adage of there's no I in team, and I definitely think Sterling is that type of player. He's not looking to progress himself. He's not, and again, I know we need players like that, like a Cantwell, that has maybe that vision. Again, hopefully see that this season coming, but we need those types of players that will be, they're all about the team. They're not really, if individual success and individual accolades come their way, whether that's a transfer or a nomination for a Player of the Year or an award, at the end of the day, they won't get that if they don't play well for the team. And Sterling epitomises that for me. At this stage, anyway, even in the it was quite surprising that he's only played 24 games overall over the last season. Considering we're used to kind of 60 games a season, so the fact he's really played a third of the season for us, being through injury or suspension, but I do think it's definitely the model we should try to go down. I know we've been discussing it in the chat that we're trying to move away from the quote unquote middle of the championship type player that's not really done very much in the last couple of years, and we can get him for a cut down price. But I do think with the way that he's shown us this season with his attitude, in his application on the park. There's certainly no reason why we shouldn't keep that model and try and apply it to the signings, hopefully over this summer and in future windows to come.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure if you just saw the headline that's just pulled up there. Sterling to stand for Prime Minister. Quite unbelievable, but I wouldn't put it past him, I guess.
Yeah, he's got my vote. He's definitely got my vote.
Yeah, oh, mine too. Yeah, I'll do it. Bob, we're going to wrap up in a second. Thanks so much for this chat. I could talk all day about Dujon Sterling, and I think we're all excited to see how he progresses. Would you like to say thanks to the viewers and any final thoughts?
Yeah, just thanks for watching, listening, subscribing. Obviously, the likes, shares, and all that good stuff keeps us pushing along. As Gary and Ross have already touched on, we've got a lot of content in the off season during the Euros and into the new season. So please keep your eyes peeled for that. Keep watching, keep sharing, tell everyone about us. We're very grateful for the viewers and the figures that we've got so far. So all we can hope for is that continues. And again, we're very thankful for everyone that attends and watches the pods.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to Bob and Gary for joining us today. Dujon Sterling, he's played kind of a bit everywhere. Hopefully next season we see him hone in on that one position. He's definitely an asset to the team. Could he be the future Rangers captain? Time will tell. Thanks for watching the Rangers Journal.